My husband, Henry 37M, and I 35F, have been married for 5 years now. I thought our marriage was going great until out of nowhere my husband confessed to having an affair with my freaking sister. You see, we're both doctors at a major university hospital, and while that might seem glamorous or fulfilling to outsiders, it also brings its own set of complexities into our relationship. The long hours, the emotional toll of caring for patients, and the fact that we are both deeply passionate about what we do means that our marriage hasn't always been picture perfect. Balancing our careers with personal time has been tough, and there have been moments when the weight of our jobs made things more difficult. But through it all, we managed to support each other. He was my partner, and I never had any shred of doubt in my head that I would be spending the rest of my life with him. In fact, 2 months ago, I discovered I was pregnant. When we first got married, Henry and I were eager to start a family. We tried for a while, but despite our hopes and best efforts, it just never happened for us. So eventually, we made peace with it. We stopped actively trying, telling ourselves that if it was meant to be, it would happen on its own time. Letting go of that dream was hard, but we poured our energy into our careers and our relationship, trusting that fate would guide us. So when I suddenly started experiencing morning sickness, I didn't immediately jump to conclusions. Part of me thought it might just be stress or something related to work, but I decided to take a pregnancy test anyway just to rule out the possibility. When the result came back positive, I was completely floored. It was such an overwhelming moment, full of disbelief and excitement. I never thought that after all these years, I would find myself staring at that little test, realizing I was going to have a baby. The emotions washed over me in waves, and I had to sit down to process the reality that I was actually pregnant. It was a mix of joy and wonder. At that moment, my first thought was to share the news with Henry. I knew how much this would mean to him after everything we'd been through. But at the time, he was away attending a series of medical conferences. This news was too important to be shared over the phone or through a quick text message, so I decided to wait until he returned so I could tell him face to face, knowing that seeing his reaction in person would make the moment all the more meaningful. The day Henry was supposed to come back from his trip, I had everything planned out perfectly. I wanted to make the moment special to celebrate the incredible news that I was pregnant. I had arranged lunch for us at our favorite restaurant, the one we always went to for important occasions or when we just needed some time to ourselves. It was a place that held a lot of memories for us, quiet, cozy, with all the dishes we both loved. I imagined the joy and surprise on his face when I told him the news, thinking of how this moment would be the start of a new chapter in our lives. When I went to pick him up at the airport, though, I could immediately sense that something was off. Henry looked preoccupied, almost lost in thought. He didn't greet me the way he usually would, there was no warm hug, no excitement in his eyes at seeing me after being apart for a while. He barely even said hello, and I could feel the distance in his demeanor. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe the long flights or the stress of the conference had taken their toll on him. I mentioned the reservation at our favorite restaurant, hoping that it would lift his mood and give us a chance to reconnect. But to my surprise, he sighed, visibly irritated, and said we should probably cancel and just head back home. His tone was sharp, almost as if he were annoyed at the idea. I was taken aback by his reaction. I mean, it wasn't like we had any other major plans for the day, and I thought a nice lunch together would be just the thing to help him unwind. I reasoned with him, saying that since we'd probably end up ordering takeout anyway, it would be better to enjoy a quick lunch out and then head home. He sighed exasperatedly and gave me a curt nod, then, as if I weren't even there, he went back to looking at his phone, scrolling absent-mindedly while I drove us to the restaurant. By the time we got to the restaurant, the energy between us felt heavy. We took our seats at the table, but Henry hardly spoke a word. Wanting to ease the tension, I asked him about the conference, hoping to spark some conversation, but his responses were short, cold, and distant, just one-word answers that didn't lead anywhere. It was so unlike him. Normally after these trips, he would share stories about the people he met, the interesting talks he attended, or the new ideas he came across. But this time, it felt like he was holding something back, and I couldn't help but wonder what was really going on. To be fair, I had noticed a slight shift in Henry's behavior in the past few weeks before our lunch that day. He had started growing distant, and while part of me was concerned, I chalked it up to the usual stress that comes with being a doctor. Our jobs are demanding, often leaving us mentally and physically drained, so I obviously didn't think much of it at first. We had both been through rough patches before due to the pressure of work, and I assumed this was just another one of those times. I kept telling myself that he would eventually open up once things settled down, that his mood would improve after his conference, and that we'd get back to normal. But sitting across from him at lunch that day, watching him barely acknowledge me, hardly speak, I began to feel more and more uneasy. Still, I tried to push the nervousness aside. I had waited long enough to tell him about the baby, and despite the tension between us, I was desperate to share the news. I thought maybe, just maybe, hearing about the pregnancy would snap him out of whatever was bothering him, and we could find joy in this life-changing moment together. But as I was gathering the courage to tell him, just when I was about to share the happiest news of our lives, Henry looked up from his plate, his voice low and steady, and said the words I never imagined hearing, "I've been cheating on you." At first, I didn't even register what he said. The restaurant was noisy with conversations and clinking dishes all around us, and for a second, I thought I had misheard. I let out a nervous laugh and asked a what, as if his words had been some kind of mistake. But then he looked me in the eyes, something he hadn't really done all day, and repeated himself, this time more clearly, with an emotionless, almost detached tone, "I have been sleeping with your sister Emma." In that moment, the world around me seemed to stop. My face went numb. My husband was sleeping with my sister Emma. Of all people, my sister. I stared at him, my mind struggling to grasp the meaning of his words. I asked him again, "What do you mean?" though deep down, I already knew. I didn't want to believe it, but the look on his face left no room for doubt. He just sat there, staring straight at me with an expression so cold and emotionless, like this was just another fact he was stating, something casual and insignificant. There was no remorse, no sign of the man I thought I knew, the man I had loved and trusted for all these years. It felt like everything I had known, our marriage, our bond, even my own sister, were crumbling right in front of me, and I was powerless to stop it. My eyes began to well up with tears. I could feel the sting of betrayal deep in my chest. With a trembling voice, I asked him, "When did it start?" I needed to know. I wasn't sure why, but some part of me hoped that maybe this was all a mistake, a misunderstanding. He began to tell me, almost casually, how him and Emma had been sleeping together for the past few months. My heart sank further with each word he said. It all started after Emma had broken up with her last boyfriend. She was devastated after the breakup and had started coming over to our place frequently for support. I remember those days vividly. I had welcomed her into our home, wanting to be there for her during such a tough time. She was my sister, and I thought we were helping her heal. But little did I know, behind my back, Henry and Emma were getting closer in ways I could never have imagined. Yes, they had always been friendly. In fact, I remember thinking at the time how nice it was that my husband and my sister got along so well. It gave me comfort knowing that we were all so close as a family. But never in my wildest nightmares did I think they were that close, that they were sleeping together. I couldn't process the enormity of it, the betrayal from both of them. As Henry continued to speak, explaining his affair, I felt everything around me start to blur. I didn't want to hear him anymore. Nothing made sense. My stomach churned, and I felt like I was going to be sick. So I grabbed my keys off the table and stood up abruptly. I didn't care that we were in the middle of a crowded restaurant. I didn't care that people might have been watching. I just had to get out of there. Henry started calling after me as I rushed towards the exit to find my car. It was only when I was in the car driving towards my house that I heard my phone ringing. It was Henry, of course. Over and over he called me, not to apologize, but to scold me for abandoning him at the restaurant and for overreacting in front of everybody. I screamed into the phone, telling him to get an Uber and leave me alone. I could barely see the road through my tears as I drove home, my mind racing and my heart shattered. When I finally got home, I locked myself in our bedroom. That is when I broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of what had just happened crashed down on me. I couldn't wrap my mind around it, my husband, the man I loved, and my own sister. How could they betray me like this? I cried until I had no tears left and my body was completely exhausted. At some point, Henry must have arrived back at the house. I heard him knocking on the bedroom door, his voice muffled through the wood. He kept saying he wanted to talk, but I couldn't bear to face him. I couldn't listen to him anymore. I refused to open the door, lying on the bed curled up in a ball as my tears stained the pillow. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but at some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, it was already midnight. The house was eerily quiet, and Henry had stopped knocking. I decided to head downstairs to get something to eat as I felt hungry. When I got to the living room, I saw Henry asleep on the couch, his phone resting on the table next to him. The sight of him lying there, looking so peaceful, made my blood boil. How could he sleep so easily after what he had just confessed to me? I stood there for a moment, seething with anger and disbelief, before my gaze shifted to his phone. I had never done this before, not once in our entire marriage. But that night, for the first time, I unlocked Henry's phone. He hadn't even bothered to change his passcode, which was the same one he'd always used, because that's how confident he was that I'd never be suspicious of him. He was so sure of my trust, so certain I'd never doubt him. Oh, what a fool I had been. How could I have been so blind to what was happening right under my nose? As I scrolled through his messages with my sister, my heart raced, dreading what I would find but needing to know the full truth. And there it was, multiple inappropriate photos they had sent to each other, each one more painful to look at than the last. Explicit images of my husband and my own sister, laughing, teasing each other, and planning their secret meetings. They had even arranged to meet up in various hotels while I had been completely oblivious. The texts from Emma were what really shattered me. In one of them, she had written about how exciting it was to sleep with him behind my back, and how the thrill of deception made their affair even better. She went so far as to say that the sex felt better because of it. I couldn't believe this was real. My own sister, the person I had grown up with and trusted, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And Henry, the man I had vowed to spend the rest of my life with, had so easily thrown our marriage away. With my hands trembling, I took photos of their messages on my own phone, needing to have evidence of what I had seen. Once I had what I needed, I went back upstairs quietly. I began packing my things. I knew I couldn't stay in that house under the same roof as Henry. I wasn't going to raise this baby with an unfaithful husband who had so deeply shattered my trust. I threw a few essentials into a bag, trying to hold myself together, but my heart was pounding in my chest and my hands shook with every item I packed. Once I was done, I drove straight to my parents' house, which was one town away. When I arrived at my parents' place, they were surprised to see me, but I didn't go into details right away. I couldn't. I just told them I needed to stay with them for a while, and thankfully, they didn't ask too many questions that night. Ever since that night, I've been staying with my parents. Yes, I'm currently going through the process of separating from Henry. After everything that has happened, I have wasted no time in filing for divorce. There's no going back after the betrayal I've experienced. My parents too are furious, and they've completely cut Emma off after finding out about everything. They are embarrassed by what she has done, and she's no longer welcome in our family. Emma has called me multiple times to apologize over and over, claiming that it was all just a huge mistake, but I don't know if I can ever forgive her. Ironically, the support I've received from Henry's family has been overwhelming, especially considering that it's their own son who caused this mess. From the moment they found out about his infidelity, they made it very clear that they were deeply disappointed in him. They don't approve of what he's done, and have taken a firm stance. They've told him that they are going to refuse to accept my sister as part of their family. It's like they see Henry for who he truly is now, and they've made no effort to hide their disgust. Update 1, to clarify a few points, as many of you have been asking about the kind of relationship Emma and I had, and why my sister would do this to me. Well, what can I say? We had what I thought was a normal sibling relationship throughout our lives. Neither of us was the golden child of the family, and both of us were equally loved by our parents. We never had any major fights or jealousy between us. I have always loved my sister through thick and thin, which is why this hurts even more. When she went through her breakup 6 months ago, I was genuinely concerned for her. Emma's ex had been caught cheating on her with a coworker, and the irony of that now is not lost on me. She was absolutely devastated, and as her big sister, I wanted to be there for her. That's why I suggested she come stay with us for a while, to help her heal and get back on her feet. What's really eating at me now is remembering how she would confide in me about her trust issues after her breakup. She would cry on my shoulder, telling me how she could never imagine doing to someone what her ex had done to her. All while she was sleeping with my husband. The level of manipulation is just. I don't even have words for it. The pregnancy has been difficult to manage emotionally. Every time I have a doctor's appointment or experience a new symptom, I'm reminded that I should be sharing these moments with my husband. Instead, I'm going through this alone. Well, not entirely alone, my parents have been incredible, and several of my colleagues at the hospital have really stepped up to support me. What's surprising is how this has affected our professional lives. Henry and I work in the same hospital, though thankfully in different departments. Word got around pretty quickly about what happened, and while most people have been professionally cordial, it's clear whose side they're on. Emma's reaction to all of this has been particularly shocking. She seems genuinely surprised that our parents have cut her off. She keeps sending them long emails about how she's still their daughter, and how family should stick together no matter what. Mom finally snapped and replied telling her that yes, family should stick together, which is exactly why they're standing by me after she chose to betray her own sister in the most horrible way possible. I'm glad that Henry's family has been so supportive. His mother especially has been incredible. She calls me regularly to check on me and the baby, and she's made it clear that no matter what happens with Henry, I'll always be part of their family. She told me she raised her son better than this, and she's deeply ashamed of his behavior. The thing that's helping me move forward is focusing on my baby. Every time I feel them move or see them during an ultrasound, it reminds me that something beautiful can come from even the darkest situations. I'm still terrified about the prospect of being a single mother, but I know it's better than staying in a marriage with someone who could betray me so completely. I'm glad that Emma left him after finding out about my pregnancy. I mean, that man had the audacity to break up our marriage thinking that he could get away with a younger version of me, but too bad he lost her too. Of course, this doesn't mean that I'm going to ever forgive Emma, but I am just glad that Henry is all alone now. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time. The divorce proceedings are moving forward, and I'm trying to focus on maintaining a healthy pregnancy despite all the stress. I'm grateful for everyone who's been supporting me through this, and I'm slowly learning that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know one thing for certain, I deserve better than what Henry and Emma did to me, and so does my baby. Update 2. Henry decided to come over to my parents' place to try to fix things again, but this time things got even worse. First, he started to convince me again to get back together. He told me how parents sometimes need to make sacrifices for the sake of their children. He went on about how our baby deserved to grow up with 2 parents instead of 1, but I was tired of this narrative. I reminded him bluntly that not too long ago, he didn't even want this baby, he had wished I would have a miscarriage, for crying out loud. Now suddenly he's preaching about the importance of family and sacrifice. When I threw that in his face, he tried to backtrack, saying that, maybe once he held the baby, his mind would change. His words were hollow, just like every promise he had ever made. I told him straight to his face, he slept with my sister. There was zero chance of us ever getting back together. But instead of accepting responsibility, Henry decided to turn things around on me. He started accusing me of causing his affair, saying how I had stopped showing him affection for months and that I was always busy with work. This was classic Henry, always trying to shift the blame and make me feel like I was the one at fault for his betrayal. He knew exactly who I was before we got married. We had been coworkers for years before we got together, so why was he suddenly acting surprised? That's when he started whining about Emma. He said she hadn't been there for him when he was feeling vulnerable, and he blamed me for not even noticing that he had been cheating on me for months. It was as if he was trying to make me feel guilty for not catching him in the act sooner. At this point, I was seething. I told him flat out that he needed to stop trying to blame me for his infidelity. Even his own parents knew that what he did was unforgivable, they had taken my side for a reason. Henry scoffed, his arrogance flaring up again, and said that his parents loved him and would eventually forgive him, no matter what. So that's when I couldn't hold it in any longer. I told him the truth, that his parents were done with him, and that they had already decided to cut him off from his inheritance. Not only that, but all that money was going to our baby instead of him. I watched his face crumble as the realization hit him. For the first time since all of this began, he was at a loss for words. His usual confidence, his smugness, it all vanished in an instant. And I won't lie, I did feel a certain satisfaction watching him process the consequences of his actions. He started yelling at me, calling me vile and disgusting for ruining his life, and how he wished he had cheated on me sooner. I just shook my head and asked him to leave, as this entire conversation was getting pointless. Then Henry got aggressively close to me and kept yelling, which made me feel really uncomfortable. At this point, my parents, who were in the other room and had tried to give me some privacy, came out to check on me since they could hear Henry's loud words. When my dad saw Henry just inches from my face and me cowering, in an instant, he rushed over and pulled Henry away. Then I watched as my dad punched Henry in the face. Henry became disoriented at first and couldn't understand what had just happened. Then my dad, towering over him, grabbed him by the collar, dragged him out, and shoved him out the door. I watched as my dad threatened him loudly that if he ever showed his face again to us, it would be his last day on earth. Since then, there's been complete silence from Henry for days. I guess he's been really shaken up by everything, he hasn't called or texted, and I've finally found some peace. I'm so grateful my dad stood up for me, and I can't wait to divorce this horrible man and close this chapter of my life for good. Update 3, it's been 8 months since my last update. I just wanted to update everyone who has been following my story. As for my pregnancy, I did give birth, and my daughter has been doing well. Henry's parents have set up a trust fund for her and have continued to visit me. They want nothing to do with Henry and have completely iced him out of the family. I've finally gotten the divorce I wanted from my ex-husband and have full custody of my child. For now, the only thing Henry is responsible for is sending child support. Furthermore, he didn't fight me over anything during our divorce proceedings and ended up paying a hefty alimony due to his affair. During the custody hearings, Henry tried to paint himself as a reformed man who deserved partial custody. However, when his own parents testified about his behavior and provided evidence of his initial rejection of the pregnancy, including his horrible wish for a miscarriage, the judge was not impressed. Emma does send me messages here and there, but overall she hasn't bothered me much, which is the greatest gift she could have given me after everything she put me through. Last month, she tried to reach out through a mutual friend, saying she wanted to meet her niece. I shut that down immediately. She may be my daughter's biological aunt, but she lost any right to be in our lives when she chose to sleep with my husband. The birth itself was an emotional experience. Henry's mother was actually in the delivery room with me, along with my mom. It was a powerful moment when she held her granddaughter for the first time and promised to make sure she would always know she was loved, regardless of her father's actions. She's kept that promise, visiting regularly and being the kind of grandmother every child deserves. My daughter is the most beautiful thing that has come out of this whole mess. She's got my eyes and, thankfully, very little resemblance to Henry. Every milestone, her first smile, her first laugh, reminds me that choosing to leave was the right decision. I couldn't imagine sharing these precious moments with someone who had betrayed me so deeply. The financial support from Henry's parents has been more than generous. They've not only set up the trust fund but also insisted on covering all medical expenses and helping me set up a college fund. They said they want to make sure their granddaughter never has to depend on Henry for anything. Speaking of Henry, he's been barely present in our lives, which is exactly how I want it. He sends his child support payments on time, probably because his parents are watching, but beyond that, he's shown little interest in being a father. Recently, I heard through mutual friends that he's been trying to reconcile with Emma, but she's apparently moved to another state and wants nothing to do with him. My parents have been my rocks through all of this. They've helped me set up a beautiful nursery, and my dad, who was never particularly emotional, turns into absolute mush around his granddaughter. It's healing to see how much love surrounds us, even after experiencing such betrayal. Looking back at everything that's happened, I can honestly say I'm in a better place now. The betrayal still hurts when I think about it, but it no longer defines me. I'm not just a woman who was cheated on by her husband and sister, I'm a successful doctor, a mother, and someone who rebuilt her life on her own terms. For now, I'm focused on watching my daughter grow and continuing to build our new life together. It's not the life I planned, but in many ways, it's better than anything I could have imagined when I was trying to make things work with Henry.